Hello. The purpose of this video is to show you how to get started with the KWare database on SQL Server. As mentioned before, there's no need for you to use SQL Server. If you're happy using Microsoft Access, that's fine. I'll be using SQL Server to demonstrate SQL, different features of SQL queries in coming videos. There are a few features of SQL Server Management Studio, the database development tool, that just add something to those demonstrations, as you will see. Okay, so if you want to get started with SQL Server on the Week 2 page, there are a couple of links to two editions of SQL Server. So SQL Server 2005 and 2008 both include an Express edition, which is a free edition. It's largely a fully featured edition of SQL Server. Has some limitations on the size of the database that it will support. And interestingly, these Express editions have only emerged as a result of the pressure being created by open source DBMS like MySQL. Now we've got links to a couple of editions of the SQL Server Express. The SQL Server 2008 Release 2 is recommended, but the download is a little bit bigger, 240 megabytes. So the SQL Server 2005 edition is fine for our purposes. The database engine is a 37 megabyte download, and the database development tool, SQL Server Management Studio, is 43 megs, so a little bit smaller. So once you've downloaded and installed one of those versions of SQL Server, you pick up this script file. So I'm going to save the script file to my desktop, and then I'm going to fire up SQL Server Management Studio, which is one of the programs. This is the database development tool that is installed as a part of the Express edition of SQL Server 2008 and downloaded separately for the Express edition of 2005. So I'll just fire that up, and when it comes up it will say, okay, so what instance of SQL Server do you want me to connect to? So it is possible to have more than one instance of SQL Server, that is the database engine, running on a computer. So the Express edition is always installed as a named instance with this default name, SQL Express. So I'm going to connect to it, and I'm using Windows Authentication. So when you install SQL Server, you'll want to make that choice. It just makes life a little bit easier. So I'm connected to the database engine through the development tool, and then what I'm going to do is open that script file, and the script file is a file that holds lots of SQL statements. So we pick it up, and so in here you'll see statements like create table that we looked at last week. So you'll see a create table statement for the customer table, the product table, and so on. And these statements are very similar to what we saw last week. They add a few extra features, so like a default value for discount percent, an identity, which means an automatically generated value for this CID primary key, a few other features. We're creating the primary key here. It's a constraint. It's one way that the data in this table is protected by the database engine. We're creating some other constraints here which you should be able to read and make sense of, and you'll find that these are consistent with the validation rules that were implemented in the Access or the JET database engine version of the KWare database that you used last week. So basically this is creating an equivalent version of the KWare database that we gave you last week. So we've got these four create table statements, and then we create something called a stored procedure with this name, reset sample data. And the purpose of a procedure is just something you can execute. It's a bit like executing a query, what this procedure does is to set up the sample data, which is quite convenient because it means that I can then experiment. I can make changes to the sample data, delete rows, insert rows, update rows, and then reset the data to the original sample data by running this stored procedure. So in here you'll see delete statements and then insert statements. So we create that procedure, and the last thing that the script does is to execute that stored procedure to set up the sample data. Okay, so now we can run this script by either coming up here and click this execute button, or you can hit F5. So that ran, and then having completed the execution of that script, we can then come up here, open up the database databases container, and you'll see the KWare database there. And you can right click on that and request a new query, and at that point you're ready to start typing in your query. Select star from customer semicolon F5 to run it, and there we go. Now you can sort of hack these things around as you wish. You don't actually need the semicolon, but it's common practice to include the semicolon at the end of the statement. And there we go. The thing is, some of the things that are nice that make it quite convenient for demonstration purposes is that I can make changes. So let's just pick up the postcode values from the customer table, select those two rows, hit F5, and I just execute that query, that one query. Or if I want to execute both queries, I can select them both and hit F5 to get two results at the bottom, and so on. So you can see there's a few nice features there. The other thing you're seeing is the color coding. So the SQL queries you'll see in the study guide have been put into this SQL Server Management Studio query window, and then we copy them out of here to preserve that color coding, which just makes them a little bit easier to read. So there's a few nice features here, and that's why we'll be using SQL Server Management Studio for demonstration purposes. Hope that made sense. Hope you have fun using SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio.